Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, well, this is Varietal Literature's YouTube page, and it's just a cozy little corner on the internet for narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights is we have readings of folk tales and folklore and fairy tales, some quite recently translated, some older books. Tonight is an older translation. From various places, mostly Northern and Western Europe, because that's, my heritage, but sometimes you branch out beyond that. And tonight's story comes to us from a place that I am well and truly blood bonded to, but maybe not so much otherwise, and that is Scotland. It's a tale that has some footing in pop culture, maybe not so much over here, but it's a tale that gets retold to this day, and it's one that I might have read before, but I think I just read, because this happens with folklore and fairy tales, a very similar version of it many years ago, though, on this channel. Probably not one you've seen. If you are watching this live, though, there is a live chat. And GS is in there. It says, good evening, GS, and you can join in and give me your thoughts as I read. On the other hand, if you're not watching live, your bonus is that down in the description below, there's timestamps for the stories, in this case, one story, and you can jump ahead to the beginning of the story if you don't want to hear me talk. Though I'm not going to talk too much this week. There's not too much to say, other than to say, well, a little bit about what I'm going to say. Pardon me. So, tonight's story is about fate and irony and all those wonderful things that we look for in old literature. And it follows a structure of storytelling, of sort of traveling on a beast and seeing some castles and collecting items that come in relevance later in the story, and so on and so forth. And it is a fairy tale, even though it is sort of collected as folklore. And just to clarify, there obviously the borders between these things are muddy, but there is a bit of a distinction between a fairy tale and folklore. Fairy tales often are reaching for moral points. They have messages and stuff. Folklore doesn't. They are usually more tied to location when they're folklore. It'll be like down in this neighborhood that was, on the other side of the hill, and it'll be named, and it'll be a real world place, and often even uses real world people, although the stories are usually kind of not true. But on the flip side, the stories that we're going to read tonight isn't quite so grounded in that. It definitely takes place in Scotland. We sort of see that in some of the language that's used, but the actual place that it takes place and all of that, never really described. And so that makes it more of a fairy tale. And I like fairy tales, though I know that fairy tales do not do very well in this channel, but that's okay. Hopefully you enjoy fairy tales as well, and we'll enjoy it. I'll be back to my more typical folklore readings as soon as possible. Now, with that said, this is a tale about when to accept fate and when to fight it. Also, I noticed today that it has been adapted into a graphic novel by Kat Seaton. Seaton, sorry, I sort of faded off there. And I have not read that graphic novel. I didn't know it existed before today, but the art looked fabulous, and it seems like a good time. So, maybe consider that if you enjoy the story. Okay, I'm going to have a drink of water, and we're going to get to the Black Bowl of Norroway. Now, since this takes place in Scotland, obviously it has to be raining. Right. Right. Tonight's tale is called The Black Bowl of Norroway. And no, I don't know if that's just some old world way of saying Norway or an actual location. When I tried to look it up, I did not figure it out. But nonetheless, tonight's story is called The Black Bowl of Norroway, and it comes to us from an old collection of folklore and fairy tales called the Scottish Fairy Book, which we've talked about before. Not a recent translation, but you can get it for free as an ebook on Project Gutenberg. In bygone days, long centuries ago, there lived a widowed queen who had 3 daughters. And this widowed queen was so poor and had fallen upon such evil days that she and her daughters had often much ado to get enough to eat. So the eldest princess determined that she would set out into the world to seek her fortune, and her mother was quite willing that she should do so. For, said she, "'tis better to work abroad than to starve at home." But as there was an old henwife living near the castle who was said to be a witch, and to be able to foretell the future, the queen sent the princess to her cottage, and before she set out on her travels, to ask her in which of the 4 arts she ought to go in order to find the best fortune. "Thou needest gang no farther than my back door, hinny," answered the old dame, who had always felt very sorry for the queen and her pretty daughters, and was glad to do them a good turn. So the princess ran through the passage to the henwife's back door and peeped out, and what should she see but a magnificent coach. Drawn by 6 beautiful cream-colored horses coming along the road. Greatly excited at this unusual sight, she hurried back to the kitchen and told the henwife what she had seen. Oh well, you've seen your fortune," said the old woman in a tone of satisfaction, "for that coach and 6 is coming for thee." Sure enough, the coach and 6 stopped at the gate of the castle, and the second princess came running down to the cottage to tell her sister to make haste, because it was waiting for her. Delighted beyond measure at the wonderful luck that had come to her, she hurried home and saying farewell to her mothers and sisters, took her seat within, and the horses, well, they galloped off immediately. And I've heard tell that they drew her to the palace of a great and wealthy prince who married her. But that is outside my story, for the story is not about her. Instead, a few weeks afterwards, that second princess thought that she would do as her sister had done, and go down to the henwife's cottage and tell her that she too was going out into the world to seek her fortune. And of course, in her heart of hearts, she hoped that what had happened to her sister would happen to her also. And curious to say, it did, of a sort. For the old henwife sent her to look out her back door, and she went, and lo and behold, another coach and 6 was coming along the road. Lucky girl. And when she went and told the old woman, she smiled upon her kindly and told her to hurry home, for the coach and 6 was her fortune also, and that it had come for her. And she too ran home, got into her grand carriage, and was driven away. And of course, after all these lucky happenings, the youngest princess was anxious to find out what her fortune might be, for the story is not about the second princess, though the rumor is she went to a great palace as well. No, indeed, the story is about the youngest princess. who was anxious to try what her fortune might be. So the very night, in high good humor, she tripped away down to the old witch's cottage, and she too was told to look out that back door. And she was only too glad to do it. Well, at first, anyways. For she fully expected to see a third coach and 6 come rolling along that high road straight for the castle door to carry her off. But alas and alack, no such a sight greeted her eager eyes, for the high road was quite deserted, and in great disappointment she ran back to the henwife to tell her so. "Then it is clear that thy fortune is not coming to meet thee this day," said the old dame, "so thou must e'en come back tomorrow." So the little princess went home again, and the next day she turned up once more at the old wife's cottage. But once more she was disappointed, for although she looked out long and eagerly, there was no glad sight of a coach and 6, or any other coach, that greeted her eyes. And on the third day, however, what should she see but a great, big, black, horrible bull come rushing along the road, bellowing as it came and tossing its head fiercely in the air. In great alarm, the little princess, she shut the door and ran to the henwife to tell her about the furious animal that was approaching. "Kitty," cried the old woman, holding up her hands in dismay, "and who would have thought that the Black Bull of Norroway would be your fate?" At the words, the poor little maiden grew pale. She'd come out to seek her fortune, but it had never dawned upon her that her fortune could be anything so terrible as this. "But the bull cannot be my fortune," she cried in terror. "I cannot go away with a bull." "But you'll need to," replied the henwife calmly, "for you're looking out of my door with the intent of meeting your fortune. And when your fortune has come to you, you must hold it." And when the poor princess ran weeping to her mother to beg to be allowed to stay home, that thought of the bull snorting still in her head, she found her mother of the same mind as the wise old woman, and so she had allowed herself to be lifted up on the back of this enormous black bull who had come up to the door of the castle and was now standing there quietly enough. And when she was settled, he set off again in his wild career. Well, she sobbed and trembled with terror and clung to his horns with all her might. And on they went until at last the poor maiden was so faint with fear and hunger that she could scarce keep her seat. Just as she was losing her hold of one of the great beast's horns, however, and feeling that she must fall to the ground, he turned his massive head round and, speaking in a wonderfully and surprisingly soft and gentle voice, said, "Eat out of my right ear, and drink out of my left ear, so wilt thou be refreshed for thy journey." So the princess put a trembling hand into the bull's right ear and drew out, to her great shock, bread and meat, which in spite of her terror she was glad to swallow. She then put her trembling little hand into his left ear, and she found a flagon of wine. Who'd ever heard of such a thing? And when she had drunk that, her strength returned to her in a wonderful way. Which is not really my experience with wine, but okay. And long they went, and sore they rode, just as it seemed to the princess that they could be getting near the world's end. They came in sight of a magnificent castle. I swear we mun bide this night, said the Black Bull of Norroway, for that is the house of one of my brothers. The princess was greatly surprised at these words, but by this time she was too tired to wonder very much at anything, and so she did not answer, but sat still where she was, until the bull ran into the courtyard of the castle and knocked his great head against the door. And the drawing, it's probably too small to see here. Here, let me... It's the same drawing on the icon, and that is of the black bull with the woman riding on the back. Of course, it's not colored because I colored them, but you can see the castle in the distance there. The door was opened at once by a very splendid footman, who treated the Black Bull with great respect and helped the princess to alight from his back. Then he ushered her into a magnificent hall where the lord of the castle and his lady and a great noble company were assembled. Well, the Black Bull trotted off quite contentedly to the grassy park which stretched all round the building to spend the night there. The lord and his lady were very kind to the princess, and gave her her supper, and led her to a richly furnished bedroom, all hung round with golden mirrors, and left her to rest there. And in the morning, just as the Black Bull came trotting up to the front door, they handed her a beautiful apple. And they told her not to break it, but to put it in her pocket, and keep it till she was in the greatest strait that mortal could be in. Then she was to break it, and it would bring her out of it. So she put the apple in her pocket, and they lifted her once more onto the Black Bull's back, and she and her strange companion continued on their journey. All that day they traveled, far further than I can tell you, and at night they came in sight of another castle, which was even bigger and grander than the first. That's where we mun bide this night, said the Black Bull, for that is the home of another of my brothers. And here the princess rested for the night in a very fine bedroom. Indeed, all hung with silken curtains, and the lord and lady of the castle did everything to please her and make her comfortable, though she could not understand why. And in the morning, before she left, they presented her with the largest pear that she had ever seen, and then warned her that she must not break it until she was in the direst strait that she'd ever been in, and then, if she broke it, it would bring her out of it. Well, she wasn't one to challenge it, so into the pocket it went. The third day, same as the other two had been, the princess and the Black Bull of Norroway rode many a weary miles. Through storm and high rain. And at sundown, they came to another castle, and this one was more splendid by far than the other two. This castle belonged to the Black Bull's youngest brother, and here the princess abode all night. Well, the bull, as usual, lay outside in the park, and this time when they departed, the princess received a most lovely plum, with the warning not to break it till she was in the greatest strait that mortal could be in. Then she was to break it, and it would set her free. On the fourth day, however, things were changed. For there was no fine castle waiting for them at the end of their journey. On the contrary, the shadows began to lengthen and they came to a dark, deep glen. Which was so gloomy and so awesome looking that the poor princess felt her courage sinking as they approached it. And then at the entrance, the Black Bull stopped. "Light down here, lady," he said. "For me, in this glen, a deadly conflict awaits me, which I must face unaided and alone. For the dark and gloomy regions that lies before us is the abode of the great spirit of darkness, who worketh much ill in the world, and I would fain fight with him and overcome him, and by my troth, I have good hope that I shall do so. As for thee, thou must seat thyself on this stone, and stir neither hand nor foot nor tongue till I return. For if thou but so much as move, then the evil spirit of the glen will have thee in his power." "But how shall I know what's happening to thee?" asked the princess anxiously, for she was beginning to grow quite fond of this huge black creature that had carried her so gallantly these last 4 days. "If I have neither move hand nor foot, nor yet to speak?" "Thou wilt know by the signs around thee," answered the bull. "For if everything about thee turn blue, then thou wilt know that I have vanquished the evil spirit. But if everything about thee turn red, then the evil spirit hath vanquished me." Well, with these words he departed, and was soon lost to sight in the dark recesses of the glen, leaving the little princess sitting motionless on her stone, afraid to move so much as a finger, in case some unknown evil fell upon her. At last, when she had sat there for well nigh an hour, a curious change began to pass over the landscape. First it turned gray, and then it turned a deep azure blue, as if the sky had descended on the earth. "The bull hath conquered," thought the princess. "Oh, what a noble animal he is!" And in her relief and delight she moved her position and crossed one leg over the other. Oh, woe a day. In a moment, a mystic spell fell upon her, which caused her to become invisible to the eyes of the Prince of Norroway, who, having vanquished the evil spirit, was loosed from the spell which had lain over him, and had transformed into the likeness of a great black bull, and who had returned in haste down the glen to present himself in his rightful form to the maiden whom he loved, and whom he hoped to win for his bride. Long he sought, but he could not find her, while all the time she was sitting patiently waiting on the stone. But the spell was on her eyes also, and hindered her seeing him as it hindered him seeing her. They were blind to each other. So she sat on and on, till at last she became so wearied and lonely and frightened that she burst out crying and cried herself to sleep. And when she woke in the morning, she felt it was no use sitting there any longer. So she rose and took her way, hardly knowing whither she was going. And she went, till at last she came to a hill made all of glass. Which blocked her way and prevented her going any further. She tried time after time to climb it, but it was all of no avail, for the surface of the hill was so slippery that she only managed to climb up a few feet to slide down again the next moment. So she began to walk round the bottom of the hill in the hope of finding some path that would lead her over it, but the hill was so big, and she was so tired that it seemed an almost hopeless quest, and her spirit died completely within her. And so she went along slowly, sobbing with despair, and she felt that if help did not come soon, she must lie down and die. Now, about midday, however, she came to a little cottage, and beside the cottage there was a smithy, where an old smith was working at his anvil. And she entered, and asked him if he could tell her of any path that would lead her over the mountain. And the old man laid down his hammer and looked at her, slowly shaking his head as he did so. Nay, nay, lassie, he said. There is no easy road over the mountain of the glass. Folk maun either walk round it, which is not an easy thing to do, for the foot of it stretches out for hundreds of miles. The folk who try to do so are almost sure to lose their way, or they maun walk over the top of it, and that can only be done by those who are shod with iron shoes, basically. They're not shoes, but that's close enough for our audience. And how am I to get these iron shoes? Cried the princess eagerly. Couldst thou fashion me a pair, of a good man? I would gladly pay thee for them. Then she stopped suddenly, for she remembered that she had no money. These soon cannot be made for siller, said the old man solemnly. They can only be earned by service. I alone make them, and I make them for those who are willing to serve me. And how long must I serve thee ere thou makest them for me? Asked the princess faintly. 7 years, replied the old man, for they be magic shoon, and that is the magic number. So as there seemed nothing else for it, the princess hired herself to the smith for 7 long years, to clean his house, cook his food, make and mend his clothes. And at the end of that time, he fashioned her a pair of iron shoes, with which she climbed the great mountain of glass with as much ease as if it had been covered with fresh green turf. And when she had reached the summit and descended to the other side, the first house that she came to was the house of an old washerwoman who lived there with her only daughter. And as the princess was now very tired, she went up to the door and knocked and asked if she might be allowed to rest there for the night. The washerwoman, who was old and ugly, with a sly and evil face, said that she might on one condition, and that was that she should try to wash a white mantle of the Black Knight of Norroway, who had brought it to her to wash, as he had got it stained in a deadly fight. Yesterday, I spent a long day washing it, went on the old dame, and I might as well have let it lie on the table, for at night, when I took it out of the wash-tub, the stains were there as dark as ever. Peradventure, maiden, if thou wouldst try thy hand upon it, thou mightst be more successful. For I am loth to disappoint the Black Knight of Norroway, who is an exceedingly great and powerful prince. Is he in any way connected with the Black Bull of Norroway? Asked the princess, for at the name her heart leaped for joy, for it seemed that mayhap she was going to find once more him whom she'd lost. And the old woman looked at her suspiciously. "There two are one," she answered, for the Black Knight chanced to have a spell thrown over him, which turned him into a black bull, which could not be lifted until he had fought with it, and overcome a mighty spirit of evil that lived in a dark glen. He fought with the spirit and overcame it, and once more regained his true form, but 'tis said that his mind is somewhat clouded at times, for he speaketh ever of a maiden whom he would fain have wedded, and whom he hath lost. Though who or what she was, no living person kens. But this story can have no interest to a stranger like thee, she added slowly, as if she were sorry for having said so much. I have no more time to waste in talking, but if thou wilt try and wash the mantle, thou art welcome to a night's lodging, and if not, I must ask thee to go on thy way. Needless to say, the princess said that she would try to wash the mantle, and it seemed as if her fingers had some magic power in them, for as soon as she put it into water, the stains vanished, and it became as white and as clean as it was when it was new. And of course, the old woman was delighted, but she was very suspicious also, for it appeared to her that there must be some mysterious link between this maiden and the knight. If his mantle became clean so easily when she washed it, when it had remained soiled and stained in spite of all the labor which she and her daughter had bestowed upon it. So, as she knew that the young gallant intended returning for it that very night, and as she wanted her daughter to get the credit of washing it, she advised the princess to go to bed early, in order to get a good night's rest after all her labors. And the princess, well, she followed her advice, and thus it came about that she was sound asleep, safely hidden in a big box bed in the corner, when the Black Knight of Norroway came to the cottage to claim his white mantle. Now, you must know that the young man had carried about this mantle with him for the last 7 years, ever since his encounter with the evil spirit of the glen. For he was always trying to find someone who could wash it for him, and never succeeding. For it had been revealed to him by a wise woman that she who could make it white and clean was destined to be his wife. Be she bonny or ugly? Bonny again. I think most people know this, but if you don't know, bonny is Scottish slang for pretty. Old or young, and that moreover she could prove a loving and a faithful and a true helpmeet. So when she came to the washerwoman's cottage, and received back his mantle white as the driven snow, he heard that it was the washerwoman's daughter who had wrought this wondrous change, and he said at once that he would marry her, and that very next day. When the princess awoke in the morning and heard all that had befallen, and how the Black Knight had come to the cottage while she was asleep, and received his mantle, and had promised to marry the washerwoman's daughter that very day, her heart, it was like to break. For now she felt she never would have had the chance of speaking to him, and telling him who she really was. And in her sore distress, she suddenly remembered the beautiful fruit which she had received on her journey 7 long years before, and which she had carried with her ever since. Surely, I'll never be in a sorer strait than I am now, she said to herself, and she drew out the apple, broke it open, and lo and behold, it was filled with the most beautiful, precious stones that she had ever seen, and at the sight of them, a plan suddenly came into her head. She took the precious stones out of the apple, and putting them into a corner of her kerchief, carried them to the washerwoman. See, said she, I am richer than mayhap you thought us was, and if thou wilt, all these riches may be thine. And how could that come about? Asked the old woman eagerly, for she had never seen so many precious stones in her life before, and she had a great desire to become a possessor of them. Only put off thy daughter's wedding for one day, replied the princess, and let me watch beside the Black Knight as he sleeps this night, for I have long had a great desire to see him. To her astonishment, The washerwoman agreed to this request, for the wily old woman was very anxious to get those jewels, which would make her rich for life. And it did not seem to her that there was any harm in the princess' request, for she had made up her mind that she would give the Black Knight a sleeping draught, which would effectually prevent him as much as speaking to the strange maiden. So she took the jewels, locked them up in her kist, and the wedding was put off. And that night the little princess slipped back into the Black Knight's apartment when he was asleep. She watched all through the long hours by his bedside. And she sang to him this song in the hope that he would awaken to hear it. 7 long years I served for thee, the glassy hill I climbed for thee, the mantle white I washed for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me? But although she sang it over and over again as if her heart would burst, he neither listened nor stirred, for the old washerwoman's potion had made sure of that. Next morning, in her great trouble, the little princess broke open the pear, hoping that its contents would help her better than the contents of the apple had done. But in it she found what she had found before, a heap of precious stones, only they were richer and more valuable than the other ones had been. So as it seemed the only thing to do, she carried them to the old woman and bribed her to put the wedding off for yet another day, and allow her to watch that night also by the Black Prince's bedside. And the washerwoman did so, for, as said she, as she locked away the stones, "I shall soon grow quite rich at this rate." But alas, it was all in vain that the princess spent long hours singing with all her might, 7 long years I served for thee, the glassy hill I climbed for thee, the mantle white I washed for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me? For the young prince whom she watched so tenderly remained deaf and motionless as a stone. By the morning she had almost lost hope, for there was only the plum remaining now, and if that failed, her last chance had gone. With trembling fingers she broke it open and found just another collection of precious stones, though richer and rarer than all the others. She ran with these to the washerwoman and, throwing them in her lap, told her she could keep them all, and welcome if she would put off the wedding once again, and let her watch by the prince for one more night. And greatly wondering, the old woman consented. But it chanced that the Black Knight, before that evening, tired with waiting for his wedding, went out hunting during the day with all his attendants behind him. And as the servants rode, they talked together about something that had puzzled them sorely these 2 nights gone by. At last an old huntsman rode up to the knight with a question upon his lips. "Master," he said, "we would fain ken who the sweet singer is who singeth throughout the night in thy chamber." "Singer?" he repeated. "There is no singer. My chamber hath been as quiet as the grave. I slept a dreamless sleep ever since I came to live at the cottage." And the old huntsman shook his head. "Taste not the old wife's draught this night, master," he said earnestly. "Then wilt thou hear what other ears have heard." Well, at other times the Black Knight would have laughed at his words, but today the man spoke with such earnestness that he could not but listen to them. So that evening, when the washerwoman, as was her wont, brought his sleeping draught of spiced ale to his bedside, like what's called a sleeping draught, she just gets him drunk. Let's be clear. He told her that it was not sweet enough for his liking. And when she returned and went to the kitchen to fetch some honey to sweeten it, he jumped out of bed, poured it all out the window, and when she came back, he pretended that he had drunk it anyways. I mean, he's a prince. Probably does stuff like that all the time. So it came to pass that he lay awake that night, and though he did not see, he heard the princess enter the room and listened to her plaintive little song. She sung in a voice that was full of sobs. 7 long years I serve for thee, the glassy hill I climb for thee, the mantle white I wash for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me? And when he heard it, he understood it all. He sprang up and took her in his arms and kissed her and asked her to tell him the whole story. And when he heard it, he was so angry with the old washerwoman and her deceitful daughter. Their daughter didn't do anything here, all right? This was the woman. But anyways, that he ordered them to leave the country at once. And he married the little princess, and they lived happily all their days. There you go. Really classic fairy tale ending there. Oh, Janera came in. Janera says, I just realized the song Bring Back My Bonnie to Me is not referring to a person named Bonnie. No. Let's bring back my beauty to me. My person who I find beautiful. Janera says, oh, sounds like a sad one. It's always sad before it's happy. And I guess it's always happy before it's sad, isn't it? Isn't that life? We have some translator's notes, which I will do now, and then we will wrap up. It is time for the part of the show where I read other people's words, which means I will leave this screen up so that you know it's not my words I'm reading. These are comments on a video that the translator, in this case Jürgen Hubert, has made. And since a lot of people don't go back and look at the comments on old videos, I like to read them at the end of episodes when I get them. This one in particular goes back to our vampire one, which was about 3 weeks ago. Not the Carmilla, not the long form one. The one that was a couple of weeks before Carmilla, where we talked about German vampires. And it's a short set of notes, but I'm going to read them all the same. So these are Jürgen's words. In some tales, staking revenants is attempted, but it's usually not enough. Regarding GS's comments on using vampire lore, well, I do encourage fan fiction, which is one of the reasons I release tales under a Creative Commons license. And he has a little winky smiley face there. Regarding ringing church bells at night, this did happen on certain holidays, especially ones with midnight masses, though personally, I'd be curious how the revenants rang the bells. Because perhaps they rang up a storm, i.e. rang the bells continuously like would be done for fires or other disasters like approaching armies. At least in German folklore, many undead had rather fluid forms. Appearing as animals was not at all unusual, though I am not aware of any appearances as a seal, but then again, most of Germany is landlocked. And of course, that's a reference to the fact that we had a story from Norway. And those are all the translator's notes tonight. Thank you again, Jürgen. I do have another set of notes from him that I'll read next week. We didn't have any translations from Jürgen tonight, of course. It is also Fairytales, which isn't his favorite thing, so I don't know. We'll see if he pops in, notices this, and follows up at all. Yeah, I mean, those are Jürgen's notes, but as a reminder, Jürgen Hubert has a Patreon called Sunken Castles Evil Poodles, which is an increasingly growing collection of never-before translated to English German folklore. And you can join that and get stories every month for a few bucks each month. Or, if you want, Jürgen also has published books, mostly on Amazon. One is a volume about spirits, I believe, and the first one I think is actually called Sunken Castles Evil Poodles, but it was just the early tales he translated. He's translated quite a few more since then, and now he's releasing them in volumes. In his second volume, Old Goatfoot, which is about the devil, don't know if that's out yet, but it will be out soon if it's not already. But you should definitely buy it because they're good. Though I have read quite a few of them at this point. Hopefully I'm not robbing any thunder. Okay. Well, that was the Black Bull of Norroway. Now and then, I just like reading fairy tales because I do like fairy tales. I like a little bit of romance and happy endings and so on. Well, I do also like folklore. But of course, fairy tales never do as well. People are not as fond of them. And that's completely fine, because folklore is a lot more wacky and unpredictable, and I definitely understand why it's more popular. But all the same, if you did enjoy it, maybe give it a like, because it could use all the boost it can get. But I don't expect this to be a blockbuster. I hope those that did hang out in the chat enjoyed their time here. Thank you so much, Janera and GS, for keeping me company in the chats there. And I am actively working on scraping together enough tales to fill a few weeks about, the holidays. I hesitate to say Christmas because they're not all Christmas tales, though many of them are. I try to find things that are a little more weird and localized, because the problem with the Christmas tales is not the Christmas aspect. I don't have any issue with that. The problem is that they start to fall into predictable forms because they're all basically just trying to tell the story of the birth of Jesus. And, I think people know that story at this point. So you don't want to hear 3 weeks of stories of me doing that. So it's trying to find stuff that is a little more unique. We may also, like we do at Halloween, read some single author stuff as well, because there's just some good Christmas stories out there. But if you really are hankering for Christmas stuff, I haven't made it yet, but I probably will by the time this, makes it to your dash. I'm going to make a little Christmas playlist of all the Christmas stuff I've done in the past years. And if you want a recommendation, my favorite one that I did was about the Wild Hunt, which, if you only know it from the Witcher games, or series, I guess, you might not know that it has heavy ties to Christmas. And that is called It's Not Christmas Until Odin Raids the Countryside, I think is the name of the video. Anyways, I will make a Christmas playlist like I did with the Halloween ones. So if you want to find some read out Halloween or Christmas tales, they're already available. With that said, I will keep the fire warm for you, Genera, GS, and everybody lurking out there in the background. You have yourself a good evening. Yeah, I'll keep the fire warm. You have a good sleep.